Hi everyone, my name is Jess. I'm the Policy Officer at Replacing Animal Research. Today I'm going to be looking at the Animal Scientific Procedures Act 1986 and specifically looking into avenues for improvements to increase replacement and transparency in animal research. So firstly, just a brief intro into Replacing Animal Research. We are a charity that was founded under our former name FRAME, which was the Fund for the Replacement of Animals in Medical Experiments, in 1969 by animal lover Dorothy Hegarty. Now, we worked with the scientific community to promote and assist with research into new alternative non-animal technologies that can help replace animal research, and we promoted the 3Rs as the most effective way to end animal research. The 3Rs being to replace animals with an alternative method, to reduce the number of animals required in the procedures, and to refine experiments and husbandry practices to reduce animal suffering. Now, today, Replacing Animal Research's focus is the replacement of animals, and we work in three core areas of change, which are funding research, education, and policy work. So just to get started, why is transparency in animal research so important? Now, we know that animal research can be a polarising and emotive subject, and it has been a contentious issue for many decades. There are many differing ethical views on the use of animals for research and testing, which can cause transparency to be difficult to achieve, with those conducting or regulating animal research often quite cautious or reluctant to share information because of this. However, without adequate transparency, it is really hard to understand where and how animals are being used in research. This in turn means that we cannot see how we can replace animals with an alternative method and if replacement opportunities are being missed. So what is the law around animal use in research? Well, in society, we know that deliberately causing suffering to an animal is not accepted, yet animals may suffer when they're used in science. Now, because of this, we need legislation that tells us under what circumstances suffering is permitted. For scientific procedures in the UK, this legislation is the Animal Scientific Procedures Act 1986, or ASPA as I'll refer to it throughout this talk. Now, ASPA regulates the use of protected animals in scientific, educational, or any other experimental procedures that may cause pain, suffering, distress, or lasting harm. Protected animals are those species that are covered by the legislation, which at the moment is living vertebrate other than man, and as of 2013 is any living cephalopod such as octopus and squid. Now, ASPA also outlines a licensing system, which requires 3 licenses to be held before work can commence using animals. There's an establishment license for any place where work is conducted using animals, a personal license for each person conducting regulated procedures, and a project license for the programme of work that is being conducted. The 3Rs, which I outlined in the intro, are also written into the legislation, with replacement being the priority of these. Now, despite replacement being a legal requirement and the first of the 3Rs, we do actually have formal acknowledgement that the current frameworks and processes are insufficient. Now, 2 examples of this are that in October 2022, a review by the Animals in Science Committee of antibody licenses granted over the past 5 years showed that many licenses did not provide sufficient demonstration that it is not currently scientifically possible for the antibodies to be produced by non-animal methods. And in February last year, we saw the publication of an independent report by Dr. Francis Rawle, which was commissioned by the National Centre for the 3Rs. Now, this report contained interviews and surveys with stakeholders within the animal research community and found that replacement does not seem to be covered well by any of the review processes. Now, as well as confirming our suspicions of replacement not being prioritised as it legally should be, these examples provide us with a deeper insight into what information we can find when we're given a deeper look into certain aspects of research. Now, there are lots of improvements that can be made to the current legislation, but for today, I'm going to be focusing on 3 areas of the legislation where there are flaws around its implementation, and this in turn is hampering openness and transparency. And as well as this, I'm going to give some possible improvements and solutions to these areas. Now, the areas I'm going to cover are missed opportunities in the annual statistics of scientific procedures on living animals in Great Britain, strengthening non-technical summaries as part of the project license application and also the accessibility of non-technical summaries, and then finally, Section 24 of the Animal Scientific Procedures Act 1986. So, to start with, under ASPA, it's a legal requirement for establishments to collect and record data on the use of animals in scientific procedures. This is then published by the Home Office in the Annual Statistics of Scientific Procedures on Living Animals in Great Britain. This report outlines data including the total number of procedures using animals, the number of procedures carried out for different purposes, the species used, severity levels of procedures, among other aspects. Now, it's this report that allows us to know that last year, in 2023, 2.68 million procedures were conducted using animals in Great Britain. Now, these statistics are really vital for transparency in order to accurately know where and how animals are used in research, to monitor where animal use is being effectively replaced, and to see where efforts need to be focused in the development of new alternatives. Now, the current statistics allow basic insight into this. However, there are opportunities to improve the current statistics and increase the level of transparency that they provide. Now, in March last year, the UK Office for Statistics Regulation published the results of a compliance check that they conducted on the previous year's annual statistics. This was in response to errors and discrepancies in the statistics found by members of the public who had scoured the data tables themselves and had gathered information through freedom of information requests directly to universities. Now, the errors that were found really brought the validity of the statistics as a whole into question, and the subsequent compliance check focused on 4 main areas, which were quality assurance in data collection and the relationships between establishments, the Home Office and the statistics team, revisions and corrections of current and future data, clarity and insight of the data that's collected, and improved user engagement. So, based on the compliance check and also research that we have conducted ourselves as a charity, there are several changes or additions that can be made to the statistics that would improve their transparency, scope, and usability. Now, the first of these is the re-inclusion of establishment type. Now, prior to 2021, the type of establishment that held a Home Office establishment licence, such as universities, government departments, etc., were also recorded, as well as the number of licences held. But the type of establishment is no longer included, which reduces transparency in an area that has no impact on privacy or identification of individual establishments. Knowing this information would help highlight the extent to which certain establishments use animals in research, so work can be focused on specific areas. Now, secondly, would be including data on the animals that are bred and killed before use in a regulated procedure. These are often called surplus animals or the additional statistics. Now, there's currently no requirement to record data on these animals, with the exception of genetically altered or specially protected animals. But this means a large number of animals are slipping through the system and not being accounted for, and therefore making the overall statistics inaccurate. Now, this data was previously published in the UK in 2018, showing the 2017 additional statistics. And this was under EU legislation that states that these figures must be published every 5 years. The 2018 UK publication showed that there were an additional 1.81 million animals bred for scientific procedures, but were killed or died without use. Now, the UK is now no longer legally obligated to publish this information post-Brexit, but we believe that not publishing this information is compromising the use of the annual statistics to accurately reflect the full scale of animal use. Now, the third inclusion would be to include data on rehoming, as there is currently no data published on animals that are rehomed after use in research. Now, under the definition of rehoming in the legislation, rehoming includes animals being transferred to other research establishments for continued use, as well as rehoming to other areas that you wouldn't typically include under the general definition of rehoming. Now, this by definition is misleading to the public, but it's also another case of not publishing the full extent of how and where animals are used in research. Now, our final improvement to the statistics would be implementing improved data and auditing processes. So we would include a legal requirement to use a standardised data collection system within establishments throughout the life of a project licence. We would also introduce external auditing systems to ensure that errors are caught and remedied before publication. Now, the next issue that I'm going to talk about that faces transparency under ASPR are non-technical summaries and project licence applications. Now, project licence applications are a legal requirement for regulated research and are completed through ASPL, which is an online e-licensing system. Now, the first section of the licence application is the non-technical summary, which are published publicly and provide a clear lay summary of why and how a research project is carried out. Now, this is also the only section of the licence application form that contains questions relating to how the 3Rs will be implemented in the project. So it really is vital that this is as robust as possible for transparency. Ensuring the 3Rs have been applied correctly and described correctly ultimately is the responsibility of the researcher who is applying for the licence. However, there are also review checkpoints that licences have to go through. This typically starts with a review by funders who are financing the project, and then the animal welfare and ethical review body within an establishment that the work will take place, and finally by Home Office inspectors who ultimately decide whether to grant a licence for work to commence or not. Now, despite this, as I previously mentioned, we do know that replacement is not being prioritised and the current frameworks and processes are insufficient, including the review processes. So what can be done to strengthen replacement in the non-technical summaries of the project licence application? Now, earlier this year in February, the Animals in Science Regulation Unit of the Home Office updated their guidance notes for project licence applications and provided further information on what to include in the application form, including the replacement section. Now, these additional guidance notes were a great step in the right direction, but we believe they can go further and think that changes need to be made to the actual application form itself in ASPL. So as you can see here, pictured on the left, this is a letter that we sent to the Home Office Animals in Science Regulation Policy Unit earlier this year, outlining additions that we would like to see to the application form. Now, this includes more specific sub-questions to ensure that applicants provide all the information required by the guidance. So if we take question 2 here, for example, which non-animal alternatives did you consider for use in this project? So if we add questions such as which databases did you use, which search terms did you use, did you reach out to any relevant organisations or specialists, what were the results of your searches, we're really providing space for the applicant's answers to be broken down and really spelled out, ensuring that A, they have fully and efficiently searched for alternative methods, and B, that they don't miss anything out when filling out the question. This in turn then makes it easier for reviewers to effectively ensure that replacement is being fulfilled and that non-technical summaries are as transparent as possible. We also believe that adding prompts and hints to each of the current questions, which I've got here in italics, this is purely based on the wording in the updated guidance document. So this already exists for the reduction and refinement sections, but there's currently nothing equivalent for the replacement section. So this really just seemed like a really simple and almost obvious addition to include for the replacement section. Now, just quickly, another issue with non-technical summaries is the way in which they're currently published. So they're currently published as large PDF documents on the government website that contain several months worth of non-technical summaries at a time. So as you can see with this example here, this publication is for April to June 2024, and it is 887 pages long. So it's not the most accessible or easy to use document. However, in the EU, NTSs are published in the Animal Use Reporting EU System database, or the ALURS database as it's called. And this allows for searching and filtering by things like country, project title, keywords, species, purpose, year, and language. And this is much more accessible. We believe the UK could really benefit and increase NTS transparency with a database of this sort. So the final issue that I'm going to cover today that faces transparency in animal research is Section 24 of the Animal Scientific Procedures Act. Now, Section 24 is the section of the legislation that is concerned with the protection of confidential information. Now, under this section, the Home Office cannot release any information that it receives in confidence under the Act, even if the provider of the information has no objection to its disclosure. This includes things like full licence applications and licensing reviews, among other information. And it really adds a level of secrecy as to why licences using animals were granted and the work that's conducted on animals. Now, this section is incompatible with previous government policies on openness and transparency, and also the central principles of the Freedom of Information Act 2000, which ASPA outdates by 14 years. Now, Section 24 has actually been raised in Parliament several times, spanning over the last 20 years, but in 2014, a public consultation was conducted by the government following their working to reduce the use of animals in scientific research delivery plan. Now, this consultation looked at whether Section 24 should be repealed, and if so, to what extent. Now, the consultation received support from many individuals and animal welfare charities, scientific bodies, and many of these called for Section 24 to be repealed. Now, despite this now being just over 10 years old, the results of this consultation have never been published. And in March 2024, the Home Office Animals in Science Regulation Policy Unit confirmed that there are no current plans to review Section 24, with the Minister at the time deciding not to take work forward. Now, it is important to note here that this was obviously a decision that was made before the general election in 2024. And we do now have a new government and new ministers in post, but we're not currently clear at the moment as to whether work around Section 24 will be restarted or not. So why is Section 24 such a barrier? Well, this is just a nice little quote that we like to use, and it's a fundamental principle of an open democracy that there should always be an assumption of transparency unless there is clear evidence that a risk of disclosure outweighs public interest. Now, this is exactly what the Freedom of Information Act is designed to do, and its existence and protection should render Section 24 obsolete. Therefore, Section 24 should be repealed, and in our view, should be repealed as per option 2B of the 2014 consultation, which at the time was actually the government's preferred option 2. Now, this option was to repeal Section 24 and amend ASPA by creating a criminal offence of malicious disclosure of information about the use of animals in scientific research, but with the amended legislative framework to include a statutory prohibition on disclosure of information relating only to people, places, and intellectual property. So ultimately, that just means that Section 24 should be repealed to allow access to more information, but information on people, places, and intellectual property should remain confidential, and the information should not be used maliciously. Now, a change of this sort would be huge for increasing transparency and would be really beneficial to better understand information that's provided by applicants in their project license applications. It would also be beneficial to better understand the ways that licenses are reviewed, so to help inform training and resources. And both of these aspects would really help close the gap that has already been identified by the reports I mentioned earlier that say the replacement isn't being fully met. Now, despite Section 24 expanding decades without any improvement, I think it really does need to keep being pushed forward and remain a priority to transparency work within the government. Now, just to wrap up quickly, we know that replacement isn't being met, despite it being a legal requirement, and that transparency is a really key factor in this. The requirements of the Animal Scientific Procedures Act are clear, but it's the frameworks and processes for implementing the Act that are currently lacking. As I've highlighted in this talk, there are several simple changes that can be made that would have a big impact on transparency, such as improvements to the statistics, strengthening project license applications and non-technical summaries, and repealing Section 24 of ASPA. Now, the government has previously done work on or is currently working on some of these areas, but we as a charity are continuing to push for changes in these areas to make sure that replacement is as robust as possible and that animal research is as transparent as possible. Thank you all very much for listening. If you would like any further information on any of our work, we have our website down at the bottom here, which is replacinganimalresearch.org.uk. And I've also listed my own email address and our general Replacing Animal Research email address, and would be happy to take any questions via email. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you have enjoyed this talk. Thank you.